Malta, a sun-drenched island in the heart of the Mediterranean, kissed by waves and winds for thousands of years. To the casual eye, it's a paradise of golden limestone cliffs and ancient harbors. But beneath the beauty, Malta hides a past far stranger, far older, and far darker than most dare to imagine. This tiny island has been called a living museum, home to megalithic temples older than the pyramids of Egypt, mysterious stone structures that seem to defy time. From the massive temple complex of Hypogeum to the mysterious cart ruts carved into solid rock, Malta whispers of a civilization that thrived here long before the rise of Greece or Rome. And yet, despite these surface wonders, the greatest secret of all was buried deep below the ground, a secret no one was supposed to find. It wasn't until the year 1902, during a routine construction project in Paola, that fate intervened. Workers digging for a new housing development struck something strange beneath their shovels. At first, it was thought to be just another cavity in Malta's porous limestone. But the deeper they dug, the more the earth gave way to something uncanny. A hollow chamber emerged. Walls too smooth to be natural, a silence too heavy to belong to mere stone. Imagine standing there, lantern light flickering, peering into a hole that seemed to descend endlessly into the earth. The workers, startled, realized they hadn't uncovered just a chamber. They had stumbled upon the entrance to an entire underground world. This was the beginning of the greatest archaeological discovery in Malta's history. A labyrinth of chambers and tunnels stretching 3 levels deep, carved out of solid rock by unknown hands thousands of years ago. The site would later be named the Ħal-Saflieni Hypogeum, meaning underground tomb. But from the very first moment of its discovery, it was clear. This was no ordinary burial site. It was something much stranger. And as the first explorers descended into the darkness, they had no idea that the Hypogeum would challenge everything we thought we knew about human history and ignite legends that still haunt Malta to this very day. But before we descend with them into this underground city of the dead, we must ask, who carved this? And how did such an advanced structure exist on a small island, thousands of years before the Great Pyramid of Giza was even built? The answers lie in the chambers themselves. The year was 1902. Imagine the scene. Men with lanterns, ropes, and little understanding of what they were about to enter. The opening gaped like the mouth of a buried beast. The workers lowered themselves in cautiously, one after the other, as dust and shadows clung to the limestone walls. What they found was staggering. A chamber carved with eerie precision, its surfaces smoothed by tools that should not have existed in Malta over 5,000 years ago. The deeper they descended, the more chambers unfolded. Passageways curving into hidden spaces, staircases chiseled from solid stone, and niches cut into walls as though for the dead to rest. The air was thick and heavy, different from the world above. Every sound, a cough, a shuffle, the scrape of boots, echoed strangely, as if the stone itself were alive and listening. But here's where it gets stranger. The Hypogeum wasn't just one chamber. It was an entire labyrinth of 3 levels, descending 35 feet beneath the ground. At its heart lay the middle chamber, a central hall large enough to gather dozens of people. Connected to it were corridors, niches, and side rooms, some barely large enough for a crouching body, others vast enough to resemble subterranean cathedrals. And then came the most famous room of all, the oracle chamber. Here, the explorers made a chilling discovery. The acoustics of this room were unlike anything they had ever heard. A single spoken word reverberated for seconds, bouncing with a resonance that seemed almost supernatural. Even more bizarre, modern scientists would later test it and find that the chamber amplifies sound at a frequency of 110 hertz, a range known to affect the human brain. Could it have been designed deliberately thousands of years ago as a chamber for ritual, trance, or altered states of consciousness? One can imagine it. A priest or leader chanting, his voice vibrating through the stone, shaking the very bodies of those gathered inside. It must have felt as though the walls themselves were alive, that the stone was speaking back. And still, the hypogeum refused to give up its full purpose, because the chambers held not only echoes, but the dead. Thousands of skeletal remains were discovered, stacked in niches, sealed in hidden cavities, and scattered across the lower chambers. Men, women, children, all reduced to bone. But even these remains offered more mystery than clarity. Some skulls, researchers noted, were elongated, stretched unnaturally, unlike typical human anatomy. Were these the results of deliberate cranial shaping, an ancient ritual to mimic the gods? Or were they something else entirely? This was not merely a tomb. It was not merely a temple. It was something in between, a place where the living communed with the dead, where ritual and burial were fused into one. And as the explorers pushed deeper, they began to realize the hypogeum was not the work of ordinary hands. Whoever carved this subterranean maze knew secrets long since lost, secrets of sound, of stone, and perhaps of something more. But the hypogeum's greatest mysteries were not architectural. They were human, because hidden within its chambers are legends, stories whispered for generations. And one in particular would turn this underground city into something far more terrifying than an archaeological site. A story of children who entered the darkness and never returned. For years after its discovery, the hypogeum was studied, mapped, and opened to limited public visits. Archaeologists marveled at its design. Locals, however, told stories that the chambers were cursed, that too much time below the surface could change a person forever. And then came the legend that would cement the hypogeum's reputation as more than stone and skeletons. It is said that in the early 20th century, a group of schoolchildren, dozens of them, were taken down into the hypogeum on an educational tour. The children descended into the lower chambers with their teacher, but never returned. The accounts vary, as legends often do. Some say a section of the hypogeum collapsed, sealing them inside forever. Others claim the children ventured into hidden tunnels beyond the known chambers, tunnels that stretched endlessly beneath Malta, twisting like veins into the earth. But the most chilling version is this: the children were not lost, they were taken. Eyewitnesses outside reportedly heard faint cries and sounds echoing from beneath the ground days later, voices that drifted up through the stone. But no rescue ever came, no bodies were recovered, and the event was quietly buried in official silence. To this day, Malta's elders still whisper of the missing children. They speak of government cover-ups, of tunnels that lead under the entire island, even reaching beneath the sea itself. Some claim that the authorities sealed off sections of the hypogeum not to protect the public from collapse, but to keep the deeper passages hidden. Because if the stories are true, those passages may lead to something the world is not ready to face. Even the earliest archaeologists noted peculiarities: uncharted corridors that seem to vanish into darkness, sudden drops into caverns never fully mapped. Could it be that the Hypogeum was once connected to a vast underground network, one that Malta itself has only barely revealed? And then there are the bones. Among the thousands of skeletons once housed in the Hypogeum, several skulls stood out. Reports in the 1920s mentioned elongated crania, strangely shaped and lacking the usual sutures of the human skull. Some researchers speculated cranial deformation. Others suggested a different lineage altogether. But before definitive studies could be made, the skulls disappeared, vanished from the official record, removed from museums, unaccounted for, as if someone wanted them forgotten. To skeptics, these are exaggerations, tales spun by overzealous storytellers. To others, they are proof that the Hypogeum is not merely a relic of the past, but a doorway into something far stranger. A place where children can vanish without a trace. A place where the dead whisper from the walls. A place that might hold the secrets of another civilization altogether. But one question remains. Who were the builders? To answer that, we must leave the children's voices behind and turn back the clock, thousands of years, to a time when Malta was not the Malta we know today. Step back in time, 5, maybe 6,000 years ago. Malta was not the crowded, sunlit island of today. It was a remote outpost in the Mediterranean, inhabited by a Neolithic people whose origins are still shrouded in mystery. These were the same people who built the megalithic temples of Menajdra and Hagar-Chim, structures older than Stonehenge, older even than the pyramids of Egypt. But if those above-ground temples seem advanced for their age, the Hypogeum is something else entirely. Think about it. Chiseling through solid limestone with primitive tools, carving out chambers across 3 descending levels, smoothing walls into curves, aligning passages with acoustic perfection. By any standard of prehistory, this should not have been possible, and yet it exists. So who were these builders? Some scholars suggest they were simple farmers and temple priests who gradually acquired the skill to work stone. But the Hypogeum doesn't feel gradual. It feels deliberate, as if designed according to knowledge far beyond its time. Here is where the comparisons begin. At Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, massive stone enclosures were built 11,000 years ago, long before agriculture was thought possible. At Çatalhöyük, one of the world's oldest cities, underground shrines and burials appear side by side with domestic life. In Sumer, the myth of the underworld echoes with imagery of subterranean passageways where the dead and divine meet. Could the Hypogeum be a Mediterranean expression of the same idea? A fusion of temple, tomb, and oracle chamber meant to bridge the living and the dead? And then there is Egypt. The Hypogeum predates the Great Pyramid by over 1,000 years. Yet within its walls, we see concepts that would later define Egyptian funerary culture. The placement of the dead in carefully carved chambers, the use of sound and resonance in ritual, the belief that subterranean spaces connect with the world beyond. Is it possible that the Hypogeum represents not an isolated Maltese tradition, but a fragment of a much older, wider knowledge? A knowledge carried across seas by a forgotten people. Some fringe researchers go further. They speak of a lost seafaring civilization, one that spread across the Mediterranean long before the rise of Greece or Rome. A culture that understood stone, sound, and astronomy in ways we are only beginning to rediscover. Was Malta a sacred center of that civilization? Was the Hypogeum their underground cathedral? And if so, what knowledge did they bury with their dead? We may never fully know, but the stone whispers its secrets to those who listen, and its most haunting whispers are not about the living, but about the journey into death itself. Because deep inside the hypogeum, past the echoing oracle chamber, lies evidence that the builders did not see death as an end, but as a passage. Step into the hypogeum not as an archaeologist, but as a member of the Neolithic community that built it. Imagine carrying a torch through the winding passages, the light flickering against smooth limestone walls, shadows stretching and twisting as you descend deeper into the earth. Here, you are not in a tomb. You are entering a threshold between worlds. Archaeologists have recovered the remains of over 7,000 individuals from the hypogeum. Men, women, children, all carefully placed within niches or sealed inside side chambers. Their presence transforms the site into more than an architectural marvel. It is a house of the dead. But unlike the silent graves of other prehistoric sites, the hypogeum was designed for interaction. The oracle chamber is proof of that. The resonant frequency of 110 Hz isn't just an acoustic trick. It's a sensory experience. Experiments conducted in the 20th century showed that exposure to this frequency can alter brain activity, producing feelings of disorientation, trance, even visions. Was this chamber a place where priests spoke to the ancestors? Where the living gathered to hear the dead speak back through the stone? Imagine the ritual. Bodies of the deceased carried down narrow passages, chants rising from the oracle chamber, the stone amplifying every word until the air itself seemed alive. The mourners would feel the vibration in their bones, their minds slipping into altered states, bridging the gap between the physical and the spiritual. But the hypogeum is not uniform. Each chamber has its own atmosphere. The lower levels are tighter, darker, and suffocating, as though meant for the final passage into the world of the dead. Some rooms contain deep pits and strange cavities, their purpose still unknown. Were they used for offerings, for burials, or for something more mysterious, a ritual of transformation? Even the artifacts found here add to the mystery. Small figures of sleeping women, delicately carved, their eyes closed in eternal rest. Were they representations of the dead, or of a goddess who ruled over the underworld? One figurine in particular, known as the Sleeping Lady, seems to embody the essence of the hypogeum. Reclining peacefully, she is both human and divine, mortal and eternal. To the people of Malta's prehistory, she may have symbolized the promise that death was not an end, but a continuation. And yet, for all the rituals of peace and transcendence, there is unease in the hypogeum. Many visitors, even in modern times, speak of a psychological weight when they descend. The silence feels oppressive, the air heavy. Some leave shaken, as though they've brushed against something not meant to be disturbed. What did the ancients truly believe about this place? Did they walk these chambers with reverence or with fear? One thing is certain. The hypogeum was not a casual burial site. It was a sacred machine, built to guide the living and the dead into a dialogue that stretched across worlds. But if this was its purpose, then why were some of its most disturbing secrets hidden away? Because the hypogeum holds not only ritual beauty, but anomalies, things that do not fit within the expected story of human history. And it is these anomalies that have drawn whispers of giants, vanished skulls, and knowledge deliberately erased from the record. For archaeologists, the hypogeum is a masterpiece of prehistoric engineering. For storytellers, it is something more, a vault of secrets that may never have been meant to surface. And at the center of those secrets are the bones. Thousands of skeletons once rested within the hypogeum. But early 20th century records describe something peculiar, a handful of skulls that were not like the others. Reports claim that these skulls were elongated, their craniums stretched unnaturally, and in some cases, they lacked the standard cranial joints, features that do not align with known human anatomy. Some suggest deliberate cranial shaping, a practice seen in other ancient cultures, but others believe these skulls belong to an entirely different lineage. The mystery deepens when we ask, where are these skulls now? By the mid-20th century, the anomalous remains were no longer accessible. They had reportedly been stored in Malta's museum collections, but later, they vanished. Official statements are vague, records incomplete. The skulls are gone, erased from public view, leaving behind only photographs and whispers. Why would such evidence disappear? Were they misplaced, stolen, or deliberately removed to protect a narrative of human history that allows for no anomalies? And then there are the giants. Some Maltese legends speak of a time when beings of enormous size roamed the islands. In some versions, these giants built the great megalithic temples. In others, they carved the Hypogeum itself, tunneling into the earth with strength beyond human capacity. The myth of the sleeping lady is sometimes reinterpreted, not as a goddess of death, but as one of the last giantesses, resting eternally beneath the earth. Combine this with the missing skulls, and the picture grows darker. Could Malta's prehistoric builders have been something other than ordinary humans? Or is this simply myth layered onto archaeology, imagination running wild where evidence is scarce? Yet the anomalies don't end with bones and giants. Visitors and researchers have long reported strange sensations inside the Hypogeum, feelings of dizziness, disorientation, or even altered consciousness. The oracle chamber's resonance might explain some of this, but could the entire structure have been designed with an advanced understanding of human psychology? Were its chambers engineered to manipulate the mind, to control ritual participants, or even to induce visions of the beyond? And then comes the most chilling story of all, the vanishing schoolchildren. If this legend holds truth, if dozens of children truly entered the Hypogeum and never returned, then the site is not only an archaeological wonder, but a tomb that still takes the living. Sealed corridors, hidden tunnels, perhaps even deeper levels that have never been explored. All of these fuel the possibility that much of the Hypogeum remains unknown. A labyrinth that swallows evidence, a vault where history hides, a silence enforced by time or by choice. But perhaps the most important anomaly is not what we find inside the Hypogeum, but how it connects outward, to myths and mysteries across the world. Because Malta's underground city is not alone. Other cultures built beneath the earth, too. And when their stories are woven together, the Hypogeum begins to look less like an isolated marvel and more like a fragment of something global, something forgotten. And that is where our journey takes us next. When we step back and look at the Hypogeum not as an isolated site, but as part of a greater puzzle, the picture begins to change. Malta is not the only place where ancient hands carved worlds beneath the ground. In Turkey, the underground city of Derinkuyu stretches for miles, a labyrinth capable of housing tens of thousands. In Egypt, the Osiris shaft and the Serapeum hint at subterranean chambers meant for ritual and power. In South America, the Chavin tunnels of Peru twist into the mountains, filled with strange acoustic properties that mirror the Hypogeum's resonance. And in Sumerian myth, the underworld is not a metaphor but a place, a shadowy realm entered through gates deep below. Across continents, across millennia, humanity has always looked downward, into the caves, the caverns, the stone womb of the earth. Was it simple practicality? A place to bury the dead, to escape enemies, to store food? Or was there something deeper in our psyche, an ancient knowledge that told us the truth was not found in the stars above, but in the darkness below? The Hypogeum of Ħal-Saflieni embodies that paradox. It is a tomb and a temple, a place of death and of transcendence, a silent stone labyrinth that still hums with a frequency our bodies respond to, even after 5,000 years. And yet, so much remains unanswered. Who were the builders that carved it with such precision? Why were skulls that did not fit the human mold quietly removed from history? What happened to the children who supposedly vanished into its depths? And why do we, even today, feel a chill when we descend into its chambers, as if we are intruders in a place still alive? Perhaps the Hypogeum is a reminder that our history is not a straight line but a broken mirror, fragments scattered across the earth, each reflecting a truth too vast to see whole. Malta holds one piece of that mirror, buried beneath layers of silence. And as long as the Hypogeum stands, it whispers to us that there are worlds beneath our feet we do not understand, that civilizations may rise and fall, but their secrets remain sealed in stone, and that sometimes the greatest mysteries are not found in the stars above, but in the darkness below. The Hypogeum is more than archaeology. It is a question carved in stone, and the answer still waits in the silence. Beneath the bustling streets of modern Malta, beneath the sunlight and the tourist paths, the Hypogeum waits. It does not demand answers. It does not reveal its truth. It only hums, quietly, endlessly, as if carrying the memory of voices long gone. To walk inside is to step out of time. The chambers press against you with silence. The air feels older than history itself, and in the stone-carved shadows you sense something watching. Perhaps memory, perhaps myth, perhaps something else. Every culture tells stories of hidden worlds, of gates to the underworld, of tunnels that lead to realms unseen, of whispers that guide the living toward forgotten truths. The Hypogeum is not just Malta's mystery. It is humanity's. A reminder that beneath every city, every field, every step we take, there may lie worlds carved by hands we no longer remember. And so the questions remain. Were these halls a sanctuary for the living, or a kingdom for the dead? Were the voices meant to heal or to summon? And what became of those who entered Munkum and never returned? We may never know. But perhaps that is the power of the Hypogeum, not to answer, but to remind us that mystery itself is sacred, that wonder begins where certainty ends. And so, in the silence of stone, Malta keeps its secret. Not lost, not forgotten, simply waiting for those brave enough to listen.